The harsh wind howled across the arid plains of Wyoming territory like a desperate cry for mercy. But Garret Ingram only heard the sound of his own breath as he spotted the impossible a woman, collapsed and barefoot, miles from any settlement or homestead. The year was 1876, a time when the West was still wild and unforgiving, especially to those who ventured unprepared into its vast emptiness. Garret pulled back on the reins of his chestnut mare, squinting against the dust. At 28, he'd seen his fair share of death on these plains cattle, men and dreams alike, but something about this crumpled form stirred an urgency in him he hadn't felt in years. "Hello there," he called out, dismounting in a fluid motion born from years in the saddle. His spurs clinked as he approached cautiously, one hand hovering near his holstered Colt. The woman didn't move at first, and Garret feared he'd come upon yet another casualty of the merciless frontier. Then she stirred, lifting her head weakly. Her face was streaked with dirt and tears, her dress torn and bloodied at the hem where her feet should have been protected by boots or shoes. "Water," she whispered, her voice so parched it barely carried over the wind. Garret knelt beside her, uncorking his canteen. "Easy now," he said, supporting her head as she drank. Not too fast. Her eyes, the color of summer cornflowers, locked onto his with a desperation that clutched at his heart. She was young, perhaps 22, with hair the color of wheat that had been crudely cut to her shoulders. "My name is Garret Ingram," he offered once she'd had enough water to wet her throat. "I've got a camp about 2 miles west. Can you tell me your name, Miss Abigail?" she managed. "Abigail Anderson." Garret nodded, noting how she clutched at her side. "You're hurt, Miss Anderson. And your feet." He glanced down at her bare feet, bloodied and blistered from what must have been miles of walking across rocky terrain. "What happened to your boots?" A flash of fear crossed her face. "They took them. Said a woman running away didn't deserve the luxury." She shuddered, not just from the cooling evening air. "Who took them?" Garret asked, his jaw tightening as he scanned the horizon. "Men from Silver Creek. I worked at the boarding house there, but the owner's son." She trailed off, her eyes filling with fresh tears. "I had to leave. When they caught me on the trail, they took my boots, my belongings. Said it would teach me to stay where I belonged." Anger surged through Garret's veins, but he kept his expression calm. Silver Creek was known for its silver mines and the rough men who worked and owned them. The town had a reputation for being particularly unkind to those who tried to leave its orbit. "You're safe now," he assured her, though out here, safety was always a relative term. "Can you stand?" She tried, but winced as her raw feet touched the ground. Without hesitation, Garret swept her up into his arms, surprised by how light she felt. "My horse is just over there. She's gentle, don't you worry." Abigail said nothing as he carried her, but her eyes took in his weathered face, the stubble on his jaw, and the kindness in his expression that contrasted with his rough exterior. "Hold on," he instructed as he helped her onto his horse. He climbed up behind her, one arm securely around her waist. "Camp's not far. I've got some salve that might help those feet of yours." As they rode, the sun began its descent, painting the vast Wyoming landscape in hues of orange and purple. Garret couldn't help but notice how Abigail leaned into him, whether from weakness or seeking comfort, he wasn't sure. His camp was modest, a small fire pit, a lean-to shelter, and his bedroll spread beneath it. He helped Abigail down and settled her on his bedroll. "Let me see to those feet," he said, kneeling before her. He rummaged in his saddlebag and pulled out a tin of salve and some clean cloth. With gentle hands that belied his rugged appearance, he cleaned her wounds, apologizing when she flinched. "Why are you helping me?" she asked suddenly, her voice stronger now that she'd had water and a moment's rest. Garret paused, considering her question. "Out here, we help each other. It's the only way to survive." He continued, tending to her feet. "Besides, my ma raised me better than to leave a lady in distress." "Your mother taught you well," she said softly. "That she did, before the fever took her when I was 16. He finished wrapping her feet and sat back on his heels. "You can't walk on these for a few days at least." Abigail looked around at the vast emptiness surrounding them. I don't have a few days. Those men might be looking for me. Silver Creek's a half-day's ride east. We're heading west come morning. Garret stood and moved to his saddlebags again. Here, she looked up in surprise as he handed her his spare pair of boots, worn leather that had seen better days but still sturdy. I can't take your boots, she protested. You can and you will, he said firmly. They'll be too big, but we can stuff them with some cloth to make them fit better. And I give you my word, Miss Anderson, no harm will come to you while you're under my protection. Abigail took the boots, running her fingers over the worn leather. Your word means a lot out here, doesn't it, Mr. Ingram? Out here, it's often all a man has, he replied, stoking the small fire. And please call me Garret. Then you must call me Abigail. A small smile touched her lips, the first he'd seen. As night fell, they shared a simple meal of beans and jerky. Garret offered Abigail his bedroll and prepared to sleep under the stars with just his saddle for a pillow. Where are you headed? She asked as he settled against his saddle. Got a small spread near Jackson Hole. Nothing fancy, just enough land to raise a modest herd. I was in Cheyenne selling some cattle. Now I'm headed home, alone, just me and the cattle. Had a partner once, but he got himself killed in a senseless saloon fight 3 years back. I'm sorry, she said genuinely. Garret shrugged. It's the way of things out here sometimes. He looked at her, curious. What about you? Where were you running to? Abigail gazed up at the stars. Anywhere but Silver Creek. I heard there was work in Fort Laramie for women who could sew and cook. I've been saving for months. Fort Laramie's northeast. You were headed in the wrong direction, she sighed. I know that now. I was just running from the boarding house owner's son. Garret prompted gently. Abigail's face hardened. Thomas Wilcox. He thought working for his father meant he owned me too. When I refused his advances, he became persistent, then threatening. Garret felt his hands clench. Did he hurt you? He tried, she whispered. Last night I fought him off, but I knew I couldn't stay, so I left before dawn with what little I had. And they caught up to you, she nodded. 3 of them, Thomas included. They took everything except the clothes on my back, said a proper lesson would teach me respect. Her voice cracked. They left me to walk back barefoot or die trying. Garret stared into the fire, his expression dark. Men like that aren't men at all. No, she agreed softly, they're not. They fell silent, the crackling of the fire and the distant howl of coyotes the only sounds breaking the night's stillness. Eventually, Abigail's breathing deepened as exhaustion claimed her. Garret stayed awake longer, watching the shadows dance across her face. Something protective stirred in him, something he hadn't felt since losing his partner and friend. It was more than just duty or common decency that made him want to ensure her safety. There was something about Abigail Anderson that called to him, like a lone star guiding a traveler home. Morning came with a blush of pink across the endless sky. Garret had already stoked the fire and was brewing coffee when Abigail woke. I feared it was all a dream, she admitted, sitting up. That I was still out there alone. No dream, Garret replied, handing her a tin cup of strong coffee. How are your feet feeling? She moved them experimentally and winced. Better, I think, but still painful. We'll try those boots after breakfast. I've lined them with some spare cloth. He offered her a plate with hardtack softened in the coffee and a strip of jerky. It's not much, but it'll keep your strength up. They ate in comfortable silence, the vast landscape stretching around them like an ocean of grass and rock. After breakfast, Garret helped Abigail try on his boots. As expected, they were too large, but with the cloth padding, they would stay on well enough. We should reach a trading post by nightfall, he explained as he packed up camp. We can get you proper provisions there. I have no money, she reminded him, a flush of embarrassment coloring her cheeks. I do, he said simply, as if that settled the matter. The day's ride was long but peaceful. Garret taught Abigail how to spot landmarks, how to read the weather in the clouds, and which plants were safe to eat in a pinch. She was a quick learner, eager for knowledge that might help her survive in this unforgiving land. Have you always been a cowboy? She asked as they crossed a shallow stream, the water glittering in the midday sun. Since I was old enough to sit a horse, he confirmed. My father ran cattle in Texas before moving us north when I was 10. He taught me everything I know about ranching. And where is he now? Same place as my mother. Fever took them both, just different years. There was an old pain in his voice, dulled by time but never fully healed. You've been alone a long time, Abigail observed. Garret glanced back at her, his eyes reflecting the vast blue sky. Being alone and being lonely aren't always the same thing, Miss Abigail. But yes, it's been a while since I've had proper company. At the trading post, a collection of rough-hewn buildings clustered around a well, Garret purchased supplies including a pair of women's boots that were only slightly too large for Abigail. She protested the expense, but he waved away her concerns. Consider it an investment in your future, he said. Can't have you walking around in oversized men's boots forever. The trading post owner's wife, a kind-faced woman named Mrs. Donovan took one look at Abigail's tattered dress and disappeared into her living quarters, returning with a simple but clean dress and a shawl. Take these, dear, she insisted. I've no daughters to pass them to, and they're just gathering dust. That night they stayed in the small room the Donovans rented to travelers. Garret insisted on sleeping on the floor, giving Abigail the narrow bed. Why Jackson Hole? She asked as darkness fell, her voice quiet in the small room. It's beautiful country, Garret replied. Reminds me of a painting my mother had. Mountains so tall they seem to touch heaven, valleys so green you'd think God spent extra time coloring them in. It sounds lovely, she murmured. It is, lonely sometimes, but lovely all the same. There was a moment of silence before Abigail spoke again. What will you do with me when we reach your ranch? The question hung in the air, heavy with implications neither of them was ready to address. That depends on what you want, Abigail, he finally said. I can help you get to Fort Laramie if that's still your aim. Or you could stay a while, heal properly, figure out your next move. I don't want to be a burden. You wouldn't be, his voice was firm. Ranch could use a woman's touch, truth be told, and I could use the help. The offer was practical, logical even, but there was something more behind his words, a hope, perhaps, that she might choose to stay. Let me think on it, she said softly. Of course, he agreed, though there was a note of disappointment in his voice that he couldn't quite hide. The journey to Jackson Hole took them 5 more days, each one bringing them closer to the magnificent mountain range that dominated the horizon. As they traveled, a companionable ease grew between them. Garret found himself sharing stories he hadn't told in years about his childhood in Texas, his dreams for expanding his ranch, even the grief of losing his friend and partner. In return, Abigail spoke of her life before Silver Creek, growing up the daughter of a schoolteacher in St. Louis, losing both parents to consumption, making her way west with dreams of adventure and independence that had soured in the harsh reality of frontier life. I never imagined ending up in a place like Silver Creek, she admitted one evening as they camped beneath a blanket of stars. But after my aunt died, I had nowhere else to go. The boarding house seemed respectable enough at first. The West has a way of testing people, Garret observed. Breaks some, strengthens others. Abigail looked at him across the fire. Which did it do to you? He considered her question, his face thoughtful in the firelight. Bit of both, I reckon. Broke me when I lost my family, my friend, but I'm still here, still standing. That counts for something. Yes, she agreed, holding his gaze. It counts for a great deal. On the 6th day, they crested a rise, and below them lay a valley cradled by mountains. A modest cabin and barn nestled against a backdrop of towering pines. A small herd of cattle grazed in the distance, and a creek wound like a silver ribbon through the property. Welcome to Ingram Ranch, Garret said, a note of pride in his voice. Abigail's breath caught. It's beautiful, Garret, just like you described. They rode down into the valley, and as they approached the cabin, a large dog bounded out to greet them, barking joyfully. That's Bear, Garret explained, dismounting and kneeling to greet the enthusiastic animal. "Only company I've had for a while now." The cabin was simple but solid, 2 rooms with a stone fireplace, handcrafted furniture, and windows that looked out onto the spectacular scenery. It was clean and well maintained, speaking to Garret's character more eloquently than words could. "It's not much," he said, suddenly self-conscious as he watched Abigail taken his home. "It's wonderful," she replied, touching a carved wooden frame holding a faded photograph of a man and woman, his parents, she presumed. That night, after a meal better than their trail rations, fresh venison and potatoes from Garret's small garden, they sat on the cabin's porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. "Have you decided?" Garret asked, breaking a comfortable silence. "About staying or continuing to Fort Laramie?" Abigail looked out at the valley, then back to Garret. In the days they'd traveled together, she'd come to admire his quiet strength, his unfailing kindness, and the way his rare smile transformed his weathered face into something truly handsome. "I'd like to stay," she said, "for a while at least, if your offer still stands." Relief and something more washed over Garret's features. "It stands for as long as you want it to." The next few weeks fell into a rhythm as natural as the seasons. Abigail proved herself adept at running a household, bringing warmth and order to Garret's Spartan existence. She planted a larger garden, hung curtains she fashioned from fabric purchased on their next trip to the trading post, and filled the cabin with small touches that made it feel more like a home than it had in years. For his part, Garret found himself looking forward to returning to the cabin each evening, to the light in the windows and the smell of cooking food. He began to notice things about Abigail, the way she hummed while working, how she talked to the chickens he'd purchased, as if they understood every word. The quiet strength that had allowed her to survive her ordeal and flourish despite it. Summer turned to early autumn, the mountains blazing with color. One evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Garret cleared his throat. "Abigail, there's something I need to ask you." She looked up from her mending, her expression curious. "What is it? Winter comes hard and fast up here. Once the snow falls, we'll be cut off until spring thaw. If you're still thinking of Fort Laramie, we'd need to leave soon." The question beneath his words was clear. Was she staying, not just for now, but for the foreseeable future? Abigail set aside her sewing. "Are you asking me to leave, Garret?" "No," he said quickly. "God, no, I'm asking, hoping, that you'll stay." A soft smile touched her lips. "I've been waiting for you to ask. I have no desire to leave, Garret, not now, maybe not ever." He moved to sit beside her, taking her hands in his. "I know it hasn't been long, but these past weeks with you, I've never felt more at home in my own home." "Nor have I," she admitted, her blue eyes reflecting the firelight. "You saved me, Garret, not just my life, but my faith in good men." "I gave you my boots and my word that day," he said, his voice low. "Now I'm offering you my heart if you'll have it." Abigail reached up to touch his face, her fingers gentle against his stubbled jaw. "I've been carrying it carefully for some time now, I think." Their first kiss was tentative, a question and an answer all at once. The second was surer, a promise exchanged without words. That winter was the happiest of Garret's life. The snow came as predicted, deep and lasting, but the isolation was a blessing rather than a hardship. They read to each other from his small collection of books, taught each other songs from their childhoods, and shared their bodies as they had shared their hearts, with tenderness and growing passion. By spring, when the first wildflowers peeked through the melting snow, they were planning their wedding, a small affair at the trading post where they had first stayed, with the Donovans and a few neighboring ranchers as witnesses. Mrs. Donovan helped Abigail fashion a simple but beautiful wedding dress from cream-colored fabric. And when Garret saw her walking toward him, flowers in her hair and happiness in her eyes, he knew with certainty that finding her barefoot on the plains had been the greatest fortune of his life. They exchanged vows on a clear May morning, the mountains standing witness to their promises. The words were traditional, but the emotion behind them was as vast as the Wyoming sky. "I never thought I'd find this," Garret confessed that night as they lay in their bed, now rightfully theirs together. "A woman who could love this hard country as I do, who could make a life here and be happy." "I never thought I'd find a man worthy of love," Abigail replied, her head on his chest. "But you showed me they exist, with your boots and your word and everything that followed." The years that followed brought challenges, as life on the frontier always did. Harsh winters, drought summers, cattle thieves, and the ever-present danger of accident or illness. But they faced each trial together, their bond growing stronger with each obstacle overcome. Their first child, a son they named Daniel after Garret's father, arrived a year after their wedding. A daughter, Emma, followed 2 years later. Both children grew strong and sure in the shadow of the mountains, learning the ways of ranching and self-reliance from their father, compassion and resilience from their mother. The ranch prospered under their joint care. Garret's herd grew, and with careful management and Abigail's knack for accounting, they were able to add to their holdings. The cabin expanded, first another bedroom, then a larger kitchen, eventually a proper dining room where they could host the growing community of settlers in the valley. 10 years after he had found her barefoot and desperate on the plains, Garret sat with Abigail on their porch, watching their children play with Bear's descendants in the yard. Her hand was in his, a gesture so familiar now it was like breathing. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked suddenly. "Staying here with me, so far from everything." Abigail turned to look at him, her face still beautiful though marked now with the fine lines of laughter and weather. "Regret? No, not for a single moment. You gave me your boots when I was barefoot, your word when I had nothing to believe in, and your heart when I feared mine was too damaged to love. And you gave me a family," he said, squeezing her hand. "Something I thought I'd lost forever. We built it together," she corrected gently. "Just like everything else." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in the same colors that had welcomed Abigail to the valley years before, Garret reflected on the strange paths that life could take. How a moment of kindness, a pair of boots, and a promise kept had led to this, a love that had not only endured but flourished in the harsh beauty of the West. "I love you, Mrs. Ingram," he said, the words as true now as they had been on their wedding day. "And I love you, Mr. Ingram," she replied, leaning her head on his shoulder as their children's laughter echoed across the land they had made their own. In the years that followed, as their children grew and eventually brought spouses and children of their own to the ranch, the story of how Garret had found Abigail barefoot on the plains became a family legend told and retold around the fireplace on winter evenings, a testament to the power of compassion, courage, and the enduring strength of love in the Wild West.